special zechus for a guest speaker many years ago. He was a law student of mine at the University of Maryland. This was maybe a different life, at least for me. But over the years, not only is Rabbi David Fink a very talented attorney, but more importantly, he's both a person who learns Torah many hours a day and also is marbitz Torah and gives many shiurim that inspire a lot of people. And we're zocheh to have him address us here today about the Yanim of Chanukah, and you can also ask him any questions you'd like to ask him. So, Rabbi Fink,
Thank you.
Our honor to have you.
Thank you. It's really an honor to be here. Rabbi Breidowitz has for a long time been my Rebbe from afar, because Baruch Hashem, in today's world, you have access to him through many different mediums, and not just myself, but my son-in-law is here, who was my Talmud before he became my son-in-law, and my whole family listens to Rabbi Breidowitz's shiurim regularly. We discuss them, and just don't underestimate how lucky you are to have access, but it's a true thing. On that same vein, I have to tell you, what an incredible zchus to be able to speak here, because this is literally hallowed ground. You people probably don't realize it because you're just learning here. You don't realize that for 40 years, this Makam Torah has been putting out leadership people. They've been putting out Rosh Yeshivas and people that are mashpia on people. There are people sitting among you you don't know now that 20 years from now are going to be Gedolei Yisrael. And nobody knows which ones they are, but that's why we're machshav every Talmud. And this Makam Torah has put out a disproportionate amount of phenomenally great people. I was telling my son-in-law how, there's some people in the faculty here now that I was in yeshiva with. I'm like, gosh, boy, did I make a wrong turn somewhere, But it's unbelievable to think of you're learning literally in the footsteps of people that have made tremendous impacts on Klal Yisrael here. So I want to first talk to you for a second about Chanukah and Purim. Those are the two Yomim Tovim that we have that are not written in the Torah Shebiksav. They came later in time. And the different challenges and responses that Klal Yisrael made to them. Chanukah, as you all know, was the Yevanim, the Greeks. The Greeks didn't want to kill us. That was not their goal. They wanted to assimilate us. They wanted to be mevatel certain mitzvahs to help us along the way, but they really wanted us to become part of their culture and to embrace their culture. Purim was the opposite. Haman had no interest in being makar of us to the ways of Achashverosh and the Malchus. They weren't interested. He wanted lahashmid laharig, to kill all the Jews. A familiar theme that's been repeated throughout history several times. But Haman was not the least bit interested in being makar of people. Haman wasn't interested in assimilating the Jews. He wanted to kill them. So the stark differences between the Yevanim and Haman. And how did Klal Yisrael respond to each threat? For the Yevanim, what did we have? We had the Maccabees, a clan from the Chashmonaim family. What did they do? They took up arms, because Jews have always been known for their physical prowess in battle, right? That's what they did. They became an army, and they fought back. And Haman, what did we do? Sak ve'efer. We fasted, we put on sackcloth, we mourned. We did tshuva. So Chanukah, where the threat was a spiritual threat, they wanted to assimilate us, they didn't want to kill us, we responded with a physical response to the spiritual threat. Purim is the opposite. Purim, there was a physical threat to us, and we responded with all the kolchos of ruchnius that we have, with tshuva, with tainus. Everything seems backwards. So understand a very basic concept. This is a little bit based on Kabbalah, but you'll spare me. I'm just going to touch on it a little bit. Everything we do here has a direct correlating event that's happening in the spiritual world. We don't understand it. We don't know how it corresponds, but there is a corresponding action. Consider it like a lever of some kind. Whatever it is, we have an impact. We don't know what the impact is. If someone's threatening your spiritual existence because your spirituality is in question, it's whether you're going to be able to continue to be Shomer Torah mitzvahs, that's what's being threatened. That is not the time to use your best weapon as being ruchnius. Because your ruchnius by definition is not at its peak. That's why for some reason there's being din v'cheshbon and shemayim about it. So they took a physical response. The army. The opposite by Purim, when there's a threat to your physicality, when someone's threatening whether you're going to continue to be allowed to exist, to live, that's the last time you want to take up a physical war. That's not your best koach at the time. We all have all koachs at our disposal, and don't for a second misunderstand me and think that there shouldn't be a ruchnius response all the time. There's always a place for the ruchnius response, but sometimes that is not the strongest weapon in the quiver. So each time they responded with something opposite. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention something to you, which many of you probably noticed already, maybe not though. Chanukah is a yontif which is miyuchad in Eretz Yisrael. Take every other yontif on the calendar, take Sukkot. What do they do in Los Angeles on Sukkot? They sit in the sukkah, they eat in the sukkah, they go to shul, right? That's how they celebrate Sukkot. How do they celebrate Sukkot here? They sit in the sukkah, they sleep in the sukkah, they go to shul. How do they celebrate the Pesach in Chicago? They have a Seder, they eat matzah, they go to shul. How do they celebrate the Seder here? They eat matzah, they eat maror, they go to shul. It's very similar. What do they do Shavuos? They stay up all night and learn. Both places. Hanukkah's not like that. In America, you have the day schools and maybe the yeshivas, they will have a Hanukkah Masiba. A little bit of a shtickle celebration, which they have. Maybe they have some latkes or some donuts or something. And of course, to adapt completely minhag hagayim, they give gifts and things of that nature. But that's not the way it is here. Hanukkah here is mamish like a yontif. You go to the Kosel any night when they're lighting Hanukkah neiros, and you have the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim and other very, Haredi type dignitaries who are there to celebrate the yontif of Hanukkah. You come and you have the most secular bus driver in the world, and you get on the bus, and his bus is flashing Chanukah Sameach Ramat Gilo. That's what every bus is alternating Chanukah Sameach. You get into a cab, and the most secular cab driver says to you, Chanukah Sameach. It does not happen in America. It's not a yontif. It's something we do to commemorate a very significant historic time 2,000 years ago. That's what Hanukkah is in America. In Eretz Yisrael, when people are saying Ravtas Rinam Dantas Dinam, it's not just about what happened 2,000 years ago. All of them know an uncle, a grandfather, or someone whose blood was spilled so that we would have access to go to the Makomos HaKadoshim. My father was a practicing Rav for 25 years before he went into business. In 1967, shortly after the war, my parents didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. Rabbanim didn't get paid in those days. Certainly not like anything that they could live on. So my parents had a secondhand bedroom set. They were married 25 years at the time, that they had gotten from some uncle who was getting rid of it. And they had put $20, $30 aside every month so that eventually they'd be able to buy a bedroom set. And they had, by the time they're 20, this 1967 came along, they had a few $1,000s in this bank account. Their only savings account that they had. And right after the 67 war, my father says to my mother, we should go to Eretz Yisrael tomorrow. And my mother says, okay, what's your thought process? Why now? He says we should use the bedroom set money and buy tickets to go to Eretz Yisrael because who knows what the UN's going to do next week. They may make them give Har Bayis back. He says, we have the chance to go to the Kosel tomorrow. My parents, my grandparents never had that opportunity. He says, maybe it's only here for a week. How can we let that go? And when you go to the Kosel any night that they're lighting Hanukkah, the tears that you see and the trembling in the voices that you hear are genuine. These are people who understand what it was like just 50 years ago when you couldn't go. The steps that lead up from Mamila to Shar Yafo, that didn't used to be there. Mamila was a hilltop. There was nothing there. And that was where the fence was, that if you wanted to look into East Jerusalem, that's where the fence started. And Jews couldn't go there for all those years. So Hanukkah is an incredibly special time here, because here, Nes Gadol HaYapo, people understand the blood and the Mesiras Nefesh and the Chaste Hashem that we're able to go to Makomos Kadoshim today. It's a very big deal. But I want to lead on from that to what happened in the Chanukah story? Again, we could talk about the Neiros, we could talk about the Beis Hamikdash, all important things. But in the Milchama, what happened? The Chashmonaim were not the mainstream. They were a small group of people that felt that we should fight against the Yevanim. In many times throughout Jewish history, it's the same thing. Mordechai in the Purim story was not a popular man. You're going to put all Klal Yisrael at risk because you won't bow down to Haman? You're a dangerous person. Bow down to him. What's the big deal? You have to be able to fit in a little bit and, give a little homage to the people that are running the country. Don't start up with everybody. He wasn't popular either. So the Chashmonaim decided to fight back. A small percentage of the leadership of Klal Yisrael at the time. But why was it? Because these people decided for their reasons, their cheshbon, their min Shemayim, that their cheshbon dais was the cheshbon of Shemayim, that we need to fight back. And they made a difference. People will often remind you, and I'm sure you've heard already, but the Chashmonaim didn't turn out to be the greatest dynasty in Klal Yisrael. They made a lot of mistakes after they regained power and returned to the Beis Hamikdash, and eventually the Churban Bayis Sheni happened. But there was a time when Matisyahu and his sons really made a difference. And that's really the thrust of what I want to talk to you for a moment. This book, which people refer to as the Chumash, I call it the Great Book of Answers. It is amazing, the answers to how many questions you will find within these pages. You just have to know how to look. I'm just going to whet your appetite with one. You all know that, there's a great philosophical question that all of you have probably heard. If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it,
Doesn't make a sound.
doesn't make a sound. Exactly. Which, by the way, this question proves that philosophers have too much time on their hands. Because the answer is obvious. If you define sound as the sound waves that are produced when the tree falls, then it made a sound. If you define sound as there being a receptor to interpret those sound waves into something that is heard, then you need somebody there to hear it, or at least a tape recorder or something. But nevertheless, would you believe me if I told you that the exact answer to this question is found within the pages of Parshas Noach? The story of the Great Flood. You will find the answer to this question. Let's take a look. It's in Perek Ches, Pasuk Hey and Vav. Rabbi Breidowitz is looking at me like I grew 3 heads. So it's talking about as the water is tossing and the teva is being bounced around, and it says, V'hamayim hayu halach v'chaser. The water is finally receding ad chodesh asiri, until the 10th month. Ba'asiri be'echad l'chodesh, on the 11th day of the 10th month, niru rashi haharim. For the first time, the mountains became visible again. The water had receded enough that you could see the mountains. And in the very next pasuk, Vayihi miketz arba'im yom, and 40 days later, Vayiftach Noach es hachalon hateva asher asa. Noach opened up the window. Well, if that's the first time he opened up the window, who were the mountains visible to 40 days earlier? Elamai, it's unavoidable that mountains are visible even if no one's looking at them. That's the answer, if you look for it. You could find ways to fetch that maybe it's not a perfect answer. I think it's about as close as you get. But there are answers in the Torah. You don't have to get even into Rashi or the Ramban, which are all phenomenal pirushim that explain so much more the richness of Torah. Just in the words of the pasuk, you will find lessons of psychology. You'll find lessons of what it means to be a yid, all within these pages. I'll give you one other example. This is so true today, and it resonates today. In Parshas, I think it's Parshas Va'era, Avram goes down to Mitzrayim with Sarah, and he meets Avimelech. And he's troubled because he is afraid that the Mitzrayim are immoral people, and Avimelech might kill him to take Sarah, who's his wife. So he makes up one of the great lies in Jewish history. It's such a great lie that we used it over and over again. She's my sister. Avram used it, Yitzchak used it. It's a great, great lie. It never worked once. But we're so bad at lying that we keep telling the same lie. So Avram tells Avimelech, she's my sister. And Avimelech is punished. Hashem brings a terrible magef on him, and he realizes that Sarah is Avram's wife. And he comes to Avram with tainas. Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? And what does Avram answer him? These are not Gemaras or drushes of Chazal. Avram answers him in the pasuk, "Ra'isi she'en bo yiras Elokim." I saw there's no yiras Hashem in this makom, so you would kill me to take my wife. Those are the words of the pasuk. No drushes. There's no yiras Hashem here, so you would kill me to take my wife. What about basic morality? What about human decency? You don't kill a man. You certainly don't kill a man to take his wife. So I was discussing this with my father once, and he said all basic morality and human decency has its etiology in Emunas Hashem. And that's why atheists are so determined to cling to things like the Big Bang Theory, which, by the way, have a lot of support in Kabbalistic sources as to the origin of the universe. If we have time, we'll talk a bit about that. I don't mean to dismiss all scientific theories, but many scientific theories are disproved or have problems over the years. Newtonian physics is replaced with Einstein physics, and we discover more things. The Hubble telescope alone changed our ideas about the origin and age of the universe drastically. But evolution, they never let go of. They may modify it, they may do this, because if we can only get God out of this equation, then we can do whatever we want. That's what the pasuk's saying. Ra'isi she'en bo yiras Elokim. I saw there's no yiras Hashem, so you'd kill me to take my wife. And I was talking to my father once. It was only a few weeks before he died, and I said to my father, this is meant as an indictment on the Mitzrayim. Avimelech and his followers were so immoral that they would kill a man to take his wife. I said, look where we're holding in America. We don't even kill a man to take his wife. Not necessary. People have affairs, they're on a break, they're separated, whatever term they want to use. The Mitzrayim understood that you don't consort with a married woman. First, you got to kill the husband at least. It's a madrega. To understand how far in the rearview mirror Sodom is for us right now. It's mamish in the rearview mirror. In Sodom, Chazal tell us that if someone was tall, they would put him on a bed and try to stretch him out with horses pulling his arms and legs in different directions to make him a normal size. And if he was too tall, they would compress him to make him fit. Everyone had to fit into their framework of what was the normal human being, the way they would torture people. We just had a famous trial in America, Kyle Rittenhouse. Hopefully none of you know anything about it. This is a guy who, again, he's probably not the Greiset Tzaddik that some people want you to believe he is, but for any purposes, he was apparently in this place in Wisconsin because there's all types of looting and rioting going on, and some people wanted to protect their private property, and the police were nowhere to be found. They were told to stay away. They have 400 people on videotape where they can see their faces going into storefronts, breaking windows, torching police stations. And they prosecute the guy who's there to protect property. I mean, the Gemara tells us stories of Sodom just like this. It's the famous story, I think it was with Lot even, but whatever, someone, I forget the exact pratim, but they'd gotten into a fight and they injured his head. And he comes, he wants a mammon, he wants a monetary recovery for someone hurting him. And the judge says, not only do you not get a monetary recovery, you have to pay your assailant for doing bloodletting, which is a type of refuah in those days. So the Chazal go on to explain that he then took and hit the judge in the head with a rock and said, now you tell you what, the money that you owe me for bloodletting, you pay to him. But that's the story that Chazal bring down. We now are living in a time where Sodom is in the rearview mirror. We're not even holding where Sodom was. We prosecute the guy who was protecting property. It's really a shocking thing. I want to conduct a little social experiment. Nobody should be embarrassed. I'm going to ask everybody to close their eyes for a second. I'm going to ask you a simple question. How many of y'all familiar with 9/11 and what happened then, right? 13 terrorists hijacked airplanes and flew their planes into various targets. How many of you think, everybody's eyes are closed now, so don't be ashamed. How many people think that if those terrorists had not decided to do that on 9/11, that all those victims would have died that day anyway. Okay, put your hands down. This is a very special group. Typically, among women, I get a 90% response that those people would have died anyway, and among men, it's about 50-50. This group was a little bit less. More people here said they would not have died that day anyway. Okay, that's interesting. There's probably something about the Ruchnius here and the way you think that's trained you in a certain way that you all think in that way. And that's fine. There's no right or wrong answer to the question. But B'derech Klal, this is a deeply, deeply philosophical question which people from the Rambam to other people have debated for years. And that is, does a person have his time? If we all believe that things are planned, every moment of the day is planned by Kadosh Baruch Hu, then those people are obviously supposed to die at that time anyway. And many other people say, nah, it doesn't sound right. They're not sure why. And there are Mefarshim who learn both ways. The Rambam on this particular topic categorically rejects that idea. He says if everything was predestined, there'd be no schar v'onesh. You can't have reward and punishment if everybody is doing what was predestined anyway. And the Rambam, in his introduction to the Shmona Prapim, gives a dozen examples where he brings rayas. The Rambam doesn't have opinions on anything. The Rambam does everything through proof. This is what makes sense logically, and here's where I prove it from. So the Rambam brings several examples to show that while there's a cheshbon of Shemayim and HaKadosh Baruch Hu has shlita over the world at all times, and at any time Hashem can intervene, but b'derech klal, Hashem does not intervene with teva, except for extraordinary circumstances. And he brings rayas to this. The first one is from Bereshis, Parshas Bereshis. After Cain kills Hevel, the pasuk says that Hashem comes to Cain and says, "Where's your brother?" And he says, and Cain makes up his thing, it was my brother's keeper. And Hashem says, you know, all the bloods of your brother are crying out to me from the ground. And Rashi touches up, the word domim is used, bloods, plural. He says, what's the plural? Why not just all the blood of Hevel? And Rashi says, these were all the descendants of Hevel who were crying in Shemayim that they never got to be born. And they were bringing tainas to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is not fair, because Cain became a murderer. We don't get born? That's what Rashi says. Now, who are these people that are tining to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that they weren't born? People that never existed. Hevel had no descendants. Cain killed him before he had any children. So who's tining? These people were never supposed to be born. They were killed that day by Cain. Their ancestor was killed. They were never born. Says the Rambam, no. What we do makes a difference. When a human being executes his bechira, that can affect Kadosh Baruch Hu's plan. Now, mind you, there's many Mefarshim who explain that part of the way Hashem makes sure everything works out is that he then had Shais, was another child from Adam, and all the descendants who were supposed to be born from Hevel were born from Shais. Hashem has no shortage of means at his disposal to make sure everyone gets a fair shake. Whether it's in the Olam HaEmes or whether it's here, Hashem has no shortage of ways of making sure that things are met right. But nevertheless, the Rambam brings a dozen other examples. I just give you one or two more. But you're probably familiar when Moshe Rabbeinu was about to kill the Mitzri, the pasuk says he looked to the left and looked to the right. Says Rashi, what's he looking at? Says he looked at all the descendants that were going to come from this Mitzri to see if any of them were going to be a ger or anyone else who could maybe be Marid Zchus, that they were going to do something for Klal Yisrael. He saw that no one but Rishayim was going to come from this Mitzri, and then he killed them. Now, I understand the concept of Nevuah is revealing something to somebody before it happens. But this is not a Nevuah that Moshe was given to see the descendants. These people were never born because Moshe killed him. So rather, Moshe is shown an alternate reality that could happen and would happen if he didn't kill the Mitzri. So the Rambam just uses these as just a couple of his rayas that what we do makes a difference. And he says, listen, Kabbalah Satorah was going to happen. Mashiach coming is going to happen. There's various things that happen in the Torah that were going to happen that are part of Hashem's master plan, and they're going to happen. But whether Shibud Mitzrayim was actually 400 years, or whether it was 210 years, those are things that we have an impact on. How events unfold is up to us. In Kabbalah Svarim, again, it describes that during the Shisha Mea Bereshis, the later something is created, the more chashiv it is to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why man was created last. And again, in Kabbalistic Sfarim, they describe how the last thing that was put into man was Bechira Chafshi. That is the greatest treasure to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the fact that we actually can choose what to do. That separates us from Malachim. That's the most incredibly dear thing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Bria. Just to sidetrack off of that for 1 second. You all know the story with Bilam and his donkey? It's one of the most graphically colorful stories. You can make a movie out of it in the whole Torah. What's going on? Bilam is going to curse Klal Yisrael, and he rides on his donkey who he's had this long-term association with, and the donkey's taking him on his way, and all of a sudden it stops. And it says in the pasuk, very clear lashon, Vayar es Hashem, Vayar, Vatera ha'osan es malach Hashem. That's what the pasuk says. The donkey saw the malach of Hashem standing in his way, and that's the way the psukim unfold. That there's a malach Hashem standing in the way, and the donkey stops. Now, there's 3 nisim that are described in the psukim with the donkey and Bilam. The first one is the donkey sees the malach. Vateras osan es malach Hashem. The second one, and you all know this one, Vayiftach Hashem es pi osan. Hashem allows the donkey to speak, and what does he say to Bilam? Have I ever steered you wrong before? What are you hitting me for? Until finally, Vayar Hashem es einei Bilam. Hashem allowed Bilam to see the malach Hashem. Now, of these 3 nisim, only 2 of them are described with the language of a nes. Vayiftach Hashem es pi osan. Hashem opened up the mouth of the donkey. You can't get a more clear lashon of nes than that. This is Hashem actively giving a koach to the donkey that he did not have. Vayiftach Hashem es pi osan. Hashem opened up the mouth of the donkey. Vayar Hashem es einei Bilam. Hashem lifted up Bilam's eyes and allowed him to see the malach Hashem. Again, clear lashon of a nes. But the first one, Vateres osan es malach Hashem. The osan saw the malach. Why not Vayigal Hashem es einei ha'osan? Seems to be the same thing, allowing the donkey or Bilam to see the malach. And Rashi apparently is troubled by this also. Because Rashi gives the very balabatish answer. Forgive me, Rashi, I don't mean it like that, but he gives the answer that, oh yeah, donkeys are allowed to see malachim. So, that's not an unusual occurrence. I got to tell you that I'm not a Talmud Chacham like your Rebbeim here, but the Gemaras that I've learned seem to imply that the higher you are in the Bria, the more that's revealed to you. But whatever, Rashi, this is what he says. Look it up yourself later. Rashi says donkeys can see malachim, and apparently, based on Rashi, you would think that all animals could. But I think that's this yesod. How does the Torah define a nes? It's no harder for Hashem to split the Yam Suf and the Red Sea than it is to put fruit on the trees. There is no degrees of difficulty, even with the French judge. Everything's the same for Hashem. He can do whatever he wants. What the Torah defines as a nes is something that affects a person's bechira. Because Hashem does not interfere with our ability to choose right or wrong. That's in our hands. And when he does interfere, that's a nes. Most of the time it's a nes nigla. You don't even see it happening behind the scenes. Like the guy who's pulled out of the World Trade Center when the building's collapsing by some man with a white beard. He doesn't know he is, never sees him again. Nes niglas happen. With a guy who misses his train and doesn't get to work that day. Hashem has his way that he can orchestrate things behind the scenes and we don't see it. The whole story of Megillah Esther is like that. But when Hashem interferes with someone's bechira, this is a big deal. Because Hashem doesn't interfere with people's bechira. When Hashem allows the donkey to see the malach, is any person's bechira being affected? Bilam has no idea why his donkey has stopped. It's almost akin to, you're about to take a 4-hour drive and you're going to drive up to, let's say, from Washington to New York. And you don't really want to make the trip, but you got to go and never get things to do. I'm going to go. And you get into your car, 10 miles out, you got a flat tire. Okay, this is not working. I'm going to be late. And you know what? I'm just, it's too more aggravation than I'm into. Maybe I'm not going to go. That's what happens when the donkey sees the Malach. Hashem is giving Bilam another chance to consider what he's doing. Maybe it's not worth the trip. Maybe Balak's got the wrong reasons. Maybe Hashem's going to have tainas on me for what I'm about to do. Maybe I'm not going to make the trip. That's an attempt to preserve Bechira, to give Bilam another chance to change his mind on his own, just by exercising his own cheshbonos. Give him a little bit of an obstacle, maybe he won't go. Didn't work. Bilam is determined to still go. So what does Hashem do? He allows the donkey to see the Malach, and then he allows the donkey to speak. He doesn't tell Bilam exactly what's going on. He just says, have I ever steered you wrong before? Bilam at that time cannot avoid the fact that there's an ace going on. It takes a certain unbelievable level of stubbornness to see an ace going on and still say, I'm forging ahead. And he does. But nevertheless, Bilam actually had to understand that the Yad Hashem was at work here. The donkey's being allowed to speak until finally, Vayar Hashem es Einei Bilam. Hashem allows Bilam to see the donkey. And Bilam understands that if he continues forward, he forfeits his life. At that time, he has no Bechira. It's taken away. So that the Torah describes, Vayaras Hashem es Einei Bilam. Hashem opened up Bilam's eyes because that was a direct assault on an individual's Bechira. But make no mistake, what we do matters. And just to drive this point home, you're all familiar a few weeks ago, we had the story of Yitzchak and Rivka davening for a child. And it says a very interesting lashon, Vaye'etar Yitzchak. Yitzchak, entreated is the way that ArtScroll translates the word, some special mean of pleading. He entreated Hashem. Rashi says this is a very unique lashon of tefillah. We usually associate tefillah with hitpalel or vayitzaku, they cried out. There's different lashonos that we have for tefillah, but vaye'etar, Rashi says, is an unusual lashon of tefillah. And Rashi says, he brings rayas from Yeshaya, that vaye'etar is a lashon of unprecedented intensity and unprecedented relentlessness. That Yitzchak is mamish pounding on the gates of Shemayim with such intensity, and he would not let up. That's the way the tefillos of Yitzchak are described. And the obvious question is why? Why did Yitzchak was so kaddish? He wasn't allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael. He had been a carbon on Har Bayis. Why did Yitzchak have to daven like this? So the Gemara offers two possible explanations. The Gemara says, first of all, Kadosh Baruch Hu made all the avos and imahos wait for children because he loves to hear the tefillos of tzaddikim, and he wanted to hear their tefillos for children. And the second reason offered by the Gemara is that if you have to wait and daven for something, then perhaps it's more chaviv to you. If you daven and have to wait for something, you treasure it even more when you get it. And Hashem wanted to make sure that the avos really treasure their children more than typical parents treasure their children. Okay, nice answers. I understand. But why Yitzchak more than Avraham? Why Yitzchak more than Yaakov? Arguably, Yitzchak was the most kaddish of the avos. He's the one who was the carbon. He's the one who wasn't allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael. Why did he have to pound on the gates of Shemayim relentlessly like Avram and Yaakov never had to do? They had to wait and they had to daven. But Yitzchak had to pound on the gates of Shemayim. Why? So I saw a Chazal Medrash maybe 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And to tell you this is life-altering is not an understatement. The Medrash explains that when Yitzchak started pounding on the gates of Shemayim, Malachim rushed to the Kisei Shel Kavod, to Hashem himself, and said, it's Yitzchak. You have to accept his tefillas. And Hashem was inclined to agree. And then other Malachim rushed to the Kisei Shel and said, no, you can't accept Yitzchak's tefillas. Not now. Why not? So you may or may not be familiar, there's a whole discussion in Chazal that all the avos were supposed to live to be 180 years old. Are you familiar with this idea? They were supposed to live to be 180 years old, and Yaakov had some years subtracted from his life because of different words he had used when he was talking to Yosef, and he only lived to be 100, I think it was 144. Avram lived to be only 175. Why? Because Hashem wanted to spare him the grief of seeing Esav commit the 3 cardinal sins on one day. He committed them all in one day, which was the day he sold the Bechorah. And Hashem didn't, that's why they were eating the lentil soup, they were in Avelis for Avram. They didn't want Avram to have the tsar of seeing his grandson become a Rasha, so they took him 5 years early. Said the Malachim running to the Kisei Shel Kavod, if you accept Yitzchak's tefillas now, immediately when he starts davening, you're going to have to take Avram even earlier. Because the children that Yitzchak are davening for is Yaakov and Esav. Esav's going to be born even earlier. Yeah, Avram's going to have to die even earlier. Now think about the ramifications of that. Yitzchak wants a child. He's davening for a child. He doesn't know that as soon as his tefillah is answered, he's starting the clock ticking on his father Avram's life. He doesn't know that. There's no way he can know that. We think when we're davening, we know what we want. We have a desired outcome that with a bakasha that we're asking for. And we think we know what the right answer is. We don't know if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to give it to us or not. We understand, we're Baal Maimin, we understand that sometimes there's other cheshbonos, but we think we know what the answer is. We have no idea. Imagine there's a cardboard box over here with two turtles. And another turtle is born into the box. This is where he's born. He's lived his entire 3 years of existence in this box. And one day come along the owners of Ar Sameach and they place a fourth turtle in the box. And the turtle says to the young turtling, what do you think about that new red carpet in the dining room? And the little turtle's like, what are you talking about? What's a dining room? This box is the world. This is the whole world. I've never seen anything else outside of it. That's the closest crude mushal I can give you. We think we understand what's going on. We understand our cardboard box. The entire galaxy that's known to mankind, that's our cardboard box. We have no idea all the cheshbonos that are going on. And that's part of Emunah and part of Bitachon, is understanding that sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't answer what we're hoping to get as an answer. It's because there's other cheshbonos going on. I want to conclude. I know time's running short. Just to give you one other idea from last week's parsha. This yesod that what you do makes a difference has to be something you carry with you your entire life. You cannot simply let the world come to you. There's been too many things for each of you individually that brought you here. In last week's parsha, there are 4 words that arguably changed the course of history. Imagine Yosef is sitting in prison in Mitzrayim. Yosef was some schlock slave who was an Eved to Potiphar and got thrown in prison. Do you really think he's sharing the same quarters with the Sarah Otham and the Sarah Mashkim? There's a separation of classes. In every prison in the world, there always has been. The nobility that get thrown into prison don't share quarters with slaves, typically. They're looked down upon. They're second class, whatever. And what happens? The Sarah Mashkim and Sarah Otham have these dreams. And Yosef says 4 words to them. Madua panim reichem hayom. Why do you have such sad faces today? And they go on and they tell him the dreams, and he describes it. He's a dream interpreter. He tells them. They reveal what's going to happen. They do come true. And a few years later, the Sarah Mashkim refers him to Paro as someone who can interpret dreams. The only reason that happened is because one person said to 2 people, why don't you look happy today? Never underestimate what one act of kindness can do to change the world. I'm going to give you one story to describe this to you. I had many great Rebbeim who I learned Torah from, but there are several who had a major impact in my life. One of them was Rav Asher Rubinstein. He was a great Rosh Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael for 50 years. Mashgiach at several yeshivas also. What many people don't know is Rav Asher grew up as a very modern American teenager in the 5 towns in New York. He went to Hafter, which is a very modern high school, co-ed. And in the 50s, when he came out, 60s, whatever it was, by his own words, I would never say this, he said, I was a bum. And my father, who was a Holocaust survivor, threw up his hands. He says, you're 18 years old, Usher. I don't know what to do with you. You know, you're not interested in learning. You're not interested in... I don't know what to do with you. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm buying you a ticket on a bus to go to Cleveland, and I'm registering you in TELS. And if you're not Matzliach there, you're on your own. You're an adult. I can't do anything else with you. So Rav Asher said, road trip. Takes the bus to Cleveland, wearing his dungarees as he describes them and his brown flowery shirt, and takes a taxi to the TELS yeshiva. He's got his suitcase there with him. He walks up the stairs, goes down the hallway, sees where the base medrash is, and opens the door. And he sees everyone in there wearing black pants and a white shirt. And Rav says, this is never going to happen. And he turns around to walk back down the door and go back to New York. And on his way down the hallway, a guy bumps into him and says, Shalom Aleichem, are you a new guy here? And Rav says, nope, I'm just passing through. And the guy says, well, we're having lunch in a few minutes. You want to have lunch with us? I haven't eaten in a few hours. Lunch would be a nice thing. So I sat down and I stayed for 16 years. This man was my Rebbe for many years. Many years after I got married, we corresponded regularly by email, and we spoke on the telephone. He stayed at my house when he gave shiurim in Baltimore. Had a major impact on my life. This man had tens of thousands of talmidim, all because, again, his story, one person said Shalom Aleichem to him. The power, ability of one act of chesed to change the world is uncalculable. Yes, your learning is important. I'm not telling you you shouldn't be learning. Learning can change the world in a million ways. But we have casual times in our day where we're walking back to our dirah, where we're having something to eat. There are casual moments where one act of chesed, one kind word, can change the world. That's what Matis Yoh was about. Not everybody agrees with me. And the truth of the matter is the Hashmonaim dynasty ended in tragedy. But there were years where it was good. They took back the Beis HaMikdash. They brought proper karbonos for a period of time. Yes, it ended in tragedy. But there was a tekufa where Matis Yoh and his followers made things good because they made a difference. And that's my inspiring message to all of you here today. There was a million acts of chance, which we'll call them chance, that brought all of you here. Use the opportunity to make a difference. Not just today, but every day of your lives. That's the lesson of Chanukah. What people can do to use their bechira to change the path of the world. Every person in this room has that koach. Use it. Go with bracha. And it's been a real zchus to talk to you today. If anybody's interested, I will give you my email address. You're welcome to correspond with me. Ask me any questions that you have. And I'd be happy to stay in touch with you if you're back in America, either or. It's David, the letter E, Fink, F-I-N-K, @yahoo.com. Really nice. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
So, you're saying that there are like periods in which we do have an impact, and there's also times where Hashem is running. Well, like Hashem's always running the show, but are we also running it? Like how does it work?
So
are
again,
we partners in running the show?
So I'm only one opinion. I can only tell you based on the learning that I've done, how I understand it. Many people will tell you different things, and the fact is that nobody knows for sure. My understanding is that Hashem created the world with a teva, and teva is to be respected. Hashem does not interfere with teva, absent extraordinary circumstances. Now, at all times, Hashem has shlita over the world. Hashem can intervene anytime he wants to with teva and make either a nes nigla or a nes nister. Anytime. But bechira is very important to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When someone picks up a gun and shoots somebody, he and he alone is responsible for the murder that ensues. Hashem gives all of us that power to literally change life and death. And there's 100 other rayas to that. We can change anything by good or bad behavior. We have that koach of bechira that we can change the path. There is a plan that Hashem has. But whether, like I said, Shibud Mitzrayim, Hashem told Avram, you're going to be slaves for 400 years. It only ended up being 210. How the plan plays out and who the players are exactly, that's completely left to the way people impact with their bechira the world. Any moment of any day, we have the ability to change the way things are going to happen, for good or for bad. But there's for lack of a better words, a default plan that's going to happen if people don't do that. But at any moment, it's not just special times. There's certain events that are going to happen in history no matter what. But when and where and how and with who, those things are up to us.
I heard this mashal of bechira is like a person that's watched a movie 100 times. He knows what's going to happen, but those people still did the action. So it's like that's the kind of like the mashal of the world, is that Hashem's like, he knows all of history already, and so, but the story how it's playing out is by people itself.
I've heard this mashal, and I think it has some utility. I'm not a big fan of it, though. I think there's a better way of describing it. And that is that Hashem is outside of Zman. Hashem has no past, present, and future. There is no such thing to him, which is why the only mitzvah in the Torah that was given completely over to man, what's that mitzvah? That Hashem is not involved with at all. He says, this is your baby. What mitzvah is that?
Like a calendar?
Kiddush HaChodesh, exactly. It says, the Beis Din has the power to say, tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh. Doesn't matter if we saw the moon tonight. We saw the moon Monday, that's okay. Tuesday's Rosh Chodesh. Beis Din has that power. I have no shaykhus to Zman. I don't know what this whole thing is. I argued with one of my Rebbe once upon a time. We had very different ideas on this. I personally don't believe that there was any calculation of time until man invented it. I think time is a measuring stick, like a ruler, that we invented to keep track of the passage of time. Hashem has no shaykhus to time. And my Rebbe would bring me rise. It says, Vayer, Vayivoker, Yom Sheni, and there was time. It talks about days, but we don't know how much time those days were and whether they were metaphorical, whether they were actually a passage of time. I can't conceive of any way that Hashem would keep track of time because there's no shaykhus to time. He's forever past, present, and future. So I don't really like the mashal of the movie because I don't see it as Hashem knowing what already happened. It all happened at one time. That's why we celebrate Pesach. That's why we celebrate Sukkot. That's why we daven for Kapara and Yom Kippur, not because Hashem said, hey, here's a good day, daven for this day. Rather, each day has a koach, and every time we get to that day on the calendar, that koach is again existing in the Bria the way it existed at one time. That's why the Gemara says that Mashiach will come on Pesach night. It's a zman miyuchad for Geula. All the days have special kochos. So again, it's a little bit of a twink on that, which is that Hashem has no shaykhus to time. He exists in the past, present, and future all at one time. It's not that he knows what you already chose to do, because to him it's all one thing. There is no past, present, and future. One riot to that very quickly, some of the Mefarshim talk about the fact that the Maisa HaEgel is recorded several parshios after Matan Torah. The Asaras HaDibros are given in Yisro, and the Egel is recorded in Parshas Kisisa. They say, why did these and everyone agrees these are recorded out of order. It's one of the places where the Torah is not in chronological order, and there's different Rishonim and different takes on it. To me, it's very simple. The Gemara says Hashem wanted to create, I think it was the Gemara, wanted to create the refuah before the Makkah. He wanted to describe the building of the Mishkan, which is what's intertwined between the Maisa of Matan Torah and the Maisa of the Egel. What do we have? The Melechus Mishkan, the building of the Mishkan, the Machzis HaShekel. Hashem wanted to record the building of the special bond between Bnei Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu before he recorded the Maisa of the Egel, which was a destruction of that bond to some extent. That again, it's a little bit more, you feel a little bit better. Before we talk about this terrible Avera, we talk about what lengths and what unity there was in Klal Yisrael to build a bond with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Again, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no shaykhus to time. We talk about a chronological order in the Torah. Hashem has no chronological order. There's no shaykhus to time. There's things that are recorded for our benefit because we are linear creatures. We have time. So that's my answer to that question. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
There's many time-bound mitzvahs. So like, does Hashem have a shaykhus to the mitzvahs that He created?
Absolutely. The mitzvahs are all here for a very specific reason.
So
Time.
He created time in order for us to connect to Him, or
Time is because we are creatures of time. We need time.
He made it that way.
He made a passage of time for us. There's no question that we are linear. We have a past, we have a present, we have a future. But we created the idea of time, of measuring hours, minutes, and things of that nature. We use that to measure it. I assume the first people that existed on the face of the world before sundials were created, they knew that morning is when the sun came up and night was when the sun went down. I don't believe that the original people in the time after Adam had clocks or sundials or things immediately. I think that was something that was invented somewhat later on so that we could keep track of the passage of time. Yeah, some people disagree with me on that. But again, that's no shaykhus to the mitzvahs. Hashem tells us on the 11th day, 11th month, we're going to create. Hashem knows that we're going to create the idea of measuring time.
But Hashem created the week though, right? Like Hashem blessed the seventh day as Shabbos. So like that's in a way where Hashem introduces.
So I could spend several hours with you about the Kabbalistic sources and how they understand that and what does it mean Hashem blessed the seventh day. I wish I had the time to talk to you about that. I'm happy to stay for the rest of the day and talk to you about it. But whether that means it's actually the seventh day or whether it's the ruchnius of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what does it mean Hashem rested on the seventh day? Hashem doesn't rest. Hashem doesn't need rest. What does that mean?
Creating new things.
But, okay, so he stopped creating new things. So do you think that Hashem actually had that on day one, I'm going to create the sun and the moon? We know they weren't created till Wednesday. But nevertheless, there's R on Sunday. So where did that R come from? What was that R? And again, the Sfarim are filled with the explanations of what the R was. It couldn't have been light, not the way we understand it, because there's nothing to produce light until Wednesday.
Machlokas.
It's not a question of machlokas, it's a question of...
According to one opinion, all the things were created on the first day, and then they were set and completed in each following day.
Or in one dibur, all types of opinions. The bottom line is we don't know because we weren't there. The Torah describes it in a way that we can process it and understand it. So there's clearly something that's laid out, and then there's obviously a lesson there. We're supposed to learn that time has a meaning. But whether there was actually a clock around or a calendar, I find that very hard to believe. That on the first Friday of the year that they knew it was Friday. That Adam knew that he was born on and created on a Friday. From what's his frame of reference? So you could say Hashem embedded in this reference. You could say that, but again, we don't know. It seems to me much more logical and likely that time was a concept that was created for us to measure the passage of time. At least time measurements of hours and minutes, things of that nature. Yes, sir.
What was the name of the Rosh Hashiva that you had mentioned?
Rav Usher Rubinstein.
Say it one more time.
Rav Usher Rubinstein.
Thank you.
His first 30 years in Eretz Yisrael, he was a mashgiach at Itri, and then at Mishkan Torah. And then later he was the Rosh Hashiva of Torah Simcha, and 3 other yeshivas that he started for aniyim who couldn't afford to go to yeshiva and had no parents and things of that nature. He's an incredible, incredible man. Do I have another minute? I'll tell you one more story. Rav Usher came to stay at my house, must be about 7, 8, 9 years ago. He was going to be in Baltimore, and he was going to give a shir at Ner Yisrael. And I said, maybe perhaps the Rosh Hashiva would have dinner with us. My family has heard Rav Usher Rubinstein stories forever. One of my favorite stories from Rav Usher Rubinstein, I was 17 years old, freshly arrived in Eretz Yisrael, and Rav Usher used to give a halacha shir for 30 minutes in the morning, before breakfast, after davening. And one time we're learning the halacha in Shulchan Aruch that it's usher to give a matana to a guy. There's a lot of pratim to this idea, but in general there's this mitzvah, a prohibition. You can't stop and give a matana, a gift to a guy. There's reasons, whatever, beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. So one of the guys from New York says, well, let's say I'm walking down Broadway in Manhattan and some drunk sticks out his hand. Does that mean I'm not allowed to give him a quarter? And Rav Usher says, on my cheshbon, you give him. What about this halacha we just learned? He says, what makes a yid special is the midas Avram Avinu, the midah of chesed. Don't corrupt your midas of chesed because you want to be so from. On my cheshbon, you give the ani. One thing he said. Anyway, Rav Usher's coming to my house for dinner. He says, call me on Wednesday. You'll know the cheshbon, what time I'm coming from Silver Spring, and I'll be in Baltimore, and we'll figure it out. I said, fine. I come home and I tell my wife, Rav Usher's coming for dinner. This is like, the Melech is coming. My family knows the high regard that I've always had for Rav Usher Rubinstein, a man that I respected, learned Torah from, and genuinely loved. And it's a yontif. Rav Usher's going to meet all my children. This is an unbelievable thing. And my wife says to me, you should ask Rav Usher if he would prefer that we brought in food from one of the local Star K establishments. Because some of the Rabbanim in America have a very well thought out policy. They don't eat in their people's houses that are members of their shul, whatever it is, because if you eat by one, you have to eat by the other. And how do you know they're each up to the same kashrus standards? I better have a low plug. I don't eat at people's houses unless it's a wrapped Star K catered thing or an OU thing. People have such a policy, which I understand. But I said to my wife, I don't think Rav Usher expects that we're going to be bringing certified food in for him. I think he expects to be eating at our home. She goes, check with him just to be sure. But 12 o'clock the next day, Rav Usher says, I should be back in Baltimore at about 5:30. That would be a great time to come to your house. Great. I said, Rebbe, would you prefer if I brought in food from one of the local Star K establishments for dinner? Silence. And after about 8 seconds, Rav Usher says, is there a problem? Well, the kashrus at my house. And I said, no, chas v'shalom. I said, some people, the Rabbanim, are knowing they don't want to say, I'll eat by this person, but not by that person. If you're uncomfortable, I'm very happy to bring food in. Again, he's silent for 10 seconds. He says, David, he says, you're my Talmud. If I don't eat at your house, what does that say about me? But a truly great man who had a major impact on my life. And it's a privilege to be able to share some of his Rishon on me with you today. Tzlacha.
Shkoyach.